Hey guys, welcome back to another unfettered tutorial. Today I'm going to talk to you about how to create this 3D lettering effect. So this is one of my absolutely go-to lettering effects. It's going to make any word that you letter instantly look like a high-quality professional illustration. And it's really easy to do in Procreate because Procreate does most of the work for you. There's a tool that you may not know about in the adjustments panel that you can use to automatically create perfectly shaped shadows and extrusions based on a flat word. And I'm going to show you where that tool is and how you can use it to create an effect like this. So grab your iPad and let's jump right in. So I've got a word lettered out here and it's got some effects on there already. So I wrote out the word Saturday in these kind of blocky letters, but I also added this outline, this blue outline to the top of it, and added a little bit of a shadow underneath that outline so it looks like there's some dimension between the flat piece of this letter and it like this wall of an outline. And I added a little texture to the background just to make things fun. So I'm going to start from here and build out my 3D extrusion and drop shadow, but you can use this 3D extrusion technique on any word. It doesn't have to be something as complicated as this. It could just be something that you hand lettered in a monoline pen, and you can create the same effect. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is create what's called an extrusion. So this is the 3D part that's going to come out from your flat top of your letters. So take your fill layer or whatever layer you have that is the whole area of your letters that you have drawn out. And you're going to select that. So tap on the layer to bring up this menu, tap select, and you're going to create a new layer. And you're going to fill it with the color that you want your extrusion to be. So I'm going to take this yellow color, go back to that new layer, tap it, and hit fill layer. So now if I hide everything else, you can see there's a yellow version of my word underneath. And I'm going to name this extrusion. And now this is the part where Procreate automatically does the work for you. So we are going to go to this adjustments menu at the top, the magic wand, and hit motion blur. And now what you're going to do is you can start at a point, like a corner of your word, put your pen down, and then drag it diagonally down and to the right. And you can see that that yellow color is kind of blurring out to the sides at that angle that we're holding our pen at. So you want to start at the word and then drag it out down and to the right to about 30%. So you'll see the percentage up here at the top, and just drag till it says motion blur 30% or somewhere around that. And then pick up your pen. So now deselect your motion blur by just tapping out of that. But we need to kind of fill in all of that space within that blur. So how we can do that is tap on your layer, hit select, tap on your layer again, make sure you still have that yellow color selected, and hit fill layer. And you can see it just got a little bit darker. It just filled in a little bit of that blur with the yellow color. So we have to do that a few times to really see a big difference. So just keep hitting select and then fill layer until you can really start to see the edges and you can see that that layer is being filled in. But to get the final touches, we're actually going to go in and color in along the edges of that extrusion so that we have like a really crisp line so it looks solid. It doesn't look blurred at the edges. So tap your layer one more time, hit select one more time, grab a monoline brush. So anything really that doesn't have a texture to it. You just need a brush that is one flat, solid shape. And then make sure the size is as big as it can get because we're trying to fill in a large area. And then you just have to go in and using several different strokes with your pen, fill in that yellow space. And you do have to make sure that you are picking up your pen and putting it back down, that you're doing this in several strokes. If you try to just put your pen down and color in the whole thing, it won't work the same way. So you have to make sure you fill in everything using all these different strokes. You can kind of zoom in and see how solid your lines are here and make sure that your edges are pretty solid. Once you're happy with that, you can deselect. And what we want to do is move this so that it looks like it's protruding from our base word. So tap your move tool or your cursor icon and that'll select your layer with the extrusion, and then you just have to move it down and to the right. So move it down, and you want to make sure that the top of that yellow lines up exactly with the top of your word. So you want to make sure you can't see any yellow up top anymore. You want to get it just exactly lined up, or as close as you can. And you can kind of go in and check and see if those corners line up, and if you want to adjust that a little bit to make that more precise, you can go in and do that. But the goal here is just to have this yellow extrusion, making it look like our word is 3D. So once we have that, now we want to add a little bit more realistic depth to it by shading the underside of that extrusion. So go ahead and create a new layer above your extrusion layer. You can name it extrusion shading. And we're going to make this a clipping mask. So we're going to tap on that layer again and hit clipping mask in your menu. Then from your color palette, grab that kind of orangey rust color and choose a brush that, again, you can kind of stick with something that is a solid grain. It's just one flat color. So I'm going to stay on my monoline round brush. And then I'm going to lower that size a little bit. And I'm just going to start drawing and filling in this darker color on the bottom of my extrusion. So anything you can imagine, if there is a like a light source coming from up here, which parts of this extrusion would be shaded? Which parts would not be receiving any of that light? And so it's going to be anything along the bottom for the most part, and maybe like these inside pieces of some of the letters. So go ahead and fill in all of those spaces that would be shaded. And you don't have to be really precise here because we made this layer a clipping mask. So we're not going to see anything that goes outside of our extrusion area. So you can be as messy as you want here, but just fill in anything that would be shaded. Just keeping in mind that you kind of want to keep the same angle across these different words. So these shading lines should be like parallel to each other. So once you have the bottom shaded, don't forget to go back in and check any other areas that would be in shadow as well. So like this little under part here on the S would be shaded in. These little parts underneath the top part of the T. And then these kind of inside pieces of the letters as well would probably be in shadow. Okay, so that looks pretty good, and you could stop here if you wanted to, and this gives it a pretty cool 3D effect. But there are a couple other tricks that we can use to give it even more dimension. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a drop shadow that's going to make it look like this block of a word is standing up on that flat surface and casting a shadow onto it. So we're going to do a couple of these drop shadows. The first one's going to be really short, just to give it a little bit of depth right at the base of the word. And then we're going to do a longer one that's going to be like that shadow that's cast from light coming this way. So first we want to take the extrusion layer, and we're going to do the same thing where we kind of copy it into a new layer with a new color. So tap on it to bring up that menu, hit select, create a new layer underneath your extrusion. You can name it short drop shadow, select black from your color palette, tap that layer again, and hit fill layer. Because this is a shadow, I'm going to change my blend mode by tapping on that N and scrolling down to multiply. Multiply is just a good blend mode to use anytime you're doing a shadow because it's going to kind of blend the colors of this layer and whatever's underneath it, and it gives it just a more natural feel, and so that's something we want to look for in a shadow. And it gives it just a more natural feel. So tap out of that, we're going to do a motion blur again. So go to your magic wand, hit motion blur, and this one, like I said, the first one's going to be really short. And it's going to be in the opposite direction from how we did our extrusion. So zoom in a bit, take a corner of your word and bring it down and to the left. And this one we're only going to do about 10%. So look at your percentage up there at the top, try to get close to 10%, and let go. Tap your magic wand again to get out of that menu. And now this one we're actually not going to fill in. Because it's a shadow, we want it to be kind of blurry around the edges. We don't want it to be like a solid filled block like we did with the extrusion. So I'm not going to fill it in with any more color. I'm going to leave it blurry, but I am going to make sure I move it down so that it looks like it's just popping out from the bottom and to the left. So I want to make sure I can't see that black anywhere along like the top and right of my letters. You can kind of just adjust that, see what looks best lined up here and down at the bottom. But this does look really harsh. It doesn't have like a natural subtle shadow effect. So to fix that, we're going to reduce the opacity. And for this one, we're going to go down to about 35%. And so now it's starting to look a little bit more like a subtle shadow of this block word here. Now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to create a much longer drop shadow, and it's going to be a lot more subtle and extended. So take your extrusion layer again, select it, create a new layer underneath your short drop shadow. You can name this one long drop shadow. Change your blend mode to multiply again. So tap on that end, drag down to multiply, and tap out of it. And then tap on that layer. You've got black selected, and hit fill layer. Now we're going to do a motion blur again, but this one's going to be much longer than the one we just did. So grab your magic wand, hit motion blur, zoom in a little, and you want to follow that same line that you did for your short drop shadow. So take your pen, start at a corner, and then try to follow that angle of your short drop shadow, but extend it out to about 30% again. Maybe a little longer if you want. But try your best to kind of look at that short drop shadow and make sure you're lining up with that angle. Tap your magic wand again to get out of there. And this one I am going to fill in a few times. So you can tap on that layer, hit select, tap on it again, and hit fill layer. And I'm going to do this 3 times. And again, this is way too harsh for my shadow, so I'm going to reduce the opacity. And this one I'm going to make way down to 10%. And we'll see how that looks. But I still need to line it up, so I'm going to grab my cursor tool and move it so that the top, I can't see anything on the top or right, and it's lined up kind of with my corners coming down to the left. So zoom out a bit, see how that looks, see if your shadow lines look weird at all. Make any adjustments that you want to make. And when you're happy with that, you are all finished with this 3D lettering piece. So what we did is we took our flat word, we added a 3D extrusion to it using the motion blur tool in Procreate. We filled in that layer so that it looked like a solid block, added shading to the bottom of it to give it that 3D effect, and then added a couple of subtle drop shadows, again using motion blur and turning the opacity way down to give it the effect as if light is shining on it from this direction and that block word is casting a shadow on the flat surface beneath it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I can't wait to see what you come up with when you practice this technique.